Have you ever stopped to wonder how it's possible that every major country on Earth is in debt? The United States, Europe, China, Japan, everyone owes money. But if every nation is in debt, then who exactly is the money owed to? It's a question so simple that most people never really think about it. Yet the answer hides one of the biggest secrets of our financial system. It's the kind of truth that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because what you'll discover is that the entire global economy runs not on gold or oil or even innovation, but on something far stranger. It runs on debt itself. Let's start with a simple number. America's debt now stands at over $36 trillion. That number is so enormous that it doesn't even feel real anymore. Politicians mention it, the news flashes it across the screen, and people nod without really understanding what it means. But $36 trillion means that for every dollar the US produces, there's nearly another dollar owed. And still, the borrowing never stops. China, the supposed creditor of the world, is sitting on its own mountain of obligations, more than $18 trillion of domestic debt and rising fast. Japan owes more than twice what its economy produces in a year. Europe's debt continues to balloon. If you add up all the world's IOUs, you reach a staggering total of more than $300 trillion, nearly 3 times the size of the entire global economy. $300 trillion. That's enough to circle the Earth with $100 bills hundreds of times. Enough to send stacks of cash to the moon, and back dozens of times. It's such a huge number that the mind can't quite grasp it. So again, if every country owes this money, who is it owed to? There must be someone, right? Some mysterious lender holding the strings of the world. But the truth is far more complex, and in a strange way, much more terrifying. Because the deeper you look, the more you realise that debt doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in circles. To understand this, we need to go back to what debt actually is. Forget the charts, the headlines, the government spreadsheets. At its core, debt is simply a promise. A promise to pay later for something you need right now. Thousands of years ago, it might have been a farmer borrowing a bag of grain from his neighbour and repaying it after harvest. There were no banks, no interest rates, no credit ratings, just trust. Over time, those simple promises grew bigger. Kings needed ships, castles and cannons. Empires needed railways, ports and armies. But one lender could no longer handle the scale. So rulers came up with a revolutionary idea. Instead of borrowing from a few nobles, why not borrow from everyone? That's how government bonds were born. In 17th century England, for example, when the king needed money for war, he sold small pieces of debt to the public. Citizens handed over their savings and got a piece of paper promising repayment plus interest. It was simple but genius. Governments could now raise vast sums without draining their treasuries or raising taxes too high. And ordinary people could earn interest safely. That simple mechanism, borrowing from the public, changed the course of history. It became the foundation of modern finance. Fast forward a few centuries, and this system has grown into a vast global web. After the world wars, countries began borrowing like never before to rebuild cities and industries. Then in 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement tied global currencies to the US dollar and the dollar itself to gold. But as the decades passed, America printed more dollars than it had gold to back them. So in 1971, President Nixon cut the link. From that moment on, money was no longer backed by gold or anything physical. It was backed purely by confidence, by the belief that governments would keep their promises. That belief became the cornerstone of the global economy. And with that freedom came something new: unlimited borrowing. Governments realised they could simply create more money whenever they needed to. Debt no longer required real gold behind it. It only required trust. And so from the 1980s onward, the world's debt exploded. Nations borrowed to fund schools, hospitals, highways and wars. Debt was no longer the last resort. It became the tool of progress. When economies slowed, politicians borrowed to keep them running. When recessions hit, they borrowed to cushion the fall. Borrowing became the fuel that kept the engine turning. Just a little break. I opened a free Telegram community where I teach how to earn money with YouTube and build channels like the one you're watching. If you want to understand how to do it, there's the link below. Back to before. But this engine doesn't run on someone else's money. It runs on everyone's. Take the United States as an example. Most people imagine America owes all its debt to foreign countries, but here's the twist. Roughly 70% of that debt is actually owed to Americans themselves. Banks, pension funds, investment firms, and even ordinary citizens. When you deposit money in your savings account, that cash doesn't just sit there waiting for you. The bank lends it out, invests it, or uses it to buy government bonds. Those bonds are simply the government's promise to repay with interest. So when you buy a bond or your bank buys one with your deposits, you are effectively lending money to the government. The government spends it and later pays you back with interest using the taxes collected from everyone else. The money goes around in a circle. This circular system repeats across the entire world. Chinese banks hold American debt. American banks hold European debt. European funds hold Japanese debt. And Japanese investors buy Chinese bonds. It's one enormous web of promises, all connected, all feeding each other. The money never really leaves the system. It just moves around, changing shape as it flows. That's why when people ask, who do we owe all this money to? The real answer is each other. The global debt system is like a giant machine where savers and borrowers are the same people, just playing different roles at different times. When the government borrows, it injects money into the economy. Businesses grow, workers get paid, and savings increase. Those savings flow back into banks and funds, which lend them again through bonds and investments. It's a closed loop, and as long as that loop keeps moving, the system stays alive. But what happens if it stops moving? What if people stop lending, stop trusting, stop believing that the promises will be kept? The system begins to collapse. Because debt isn't just money, it's motion. It's the lifeblood of the modern economy. If the circulation stops, everything else does too. This is exactly what happened in Greece after 2008. When investors lost faith and stopped buying Greek bonds, the government ran out of money almost overnight. It couldn't borrow, couldn't pay its bills, and had to impose brutal austerity measures. Wages collapsed, unemployment soared, and the economy shrank by a quarter in just a few years. That's what happens when trust disappears from the debt cycle. It's like pulling the plug on a machine that needs constant power. So why don't countries just stop borrowing altogether? Why not live within their means? The uncomfortable truth is, they can't. Modern economies are addicted to debt because it's what keeps them alive. Every major government budget depends on borrowing. In the United States, roughly 1 in every $4 the government spends is borrowed. In China, it's about 1 in 5. If that flow suddenly stopped, money would vanish from the economy. Businesses would struggle, jobs would disappear, spending would dry up, and the entire system would begin to seize. That's why no politician can win by promising to cut spending drastically. It would mean triggering an instant recession. So the cycle continues because no one can afford to stop it. But cycles like this always come with risk. The more you borrow, the more you owe, and the more fragile the system becomes. When interest rates rise, debt becomes heavier. When inflation surges, the value of those promises erodes. And when confidence breaks, it can all unravel in a heartbeat. Oh, I want to remind you that if you want to build a YouTube channel like this, I can help you in my free Telegram community with the link below. To keep the illusion alive, governments often borrow new money to pay off the old. It's like using one credit card to pay another. The numbers grow, but the world pretends it's fine. Yet behind the calm surface, cracks are forming. Because as global debt grows faster than the global economy, the balance starts to tip. Each year, a bigger share of tax revenue goes toward paying interest instead of funding new schools, hospitals, or infrastructure. The debt isn't being reduced, it's being recycled. And when that recycling slows, governments have one last card to play, printing more money. It's called quantitative easing, but in plain language, it means creating money out of nothing. Central banks buy their own country's debt with freshly created funds to keep the machine running. It works for a while, but there's a cost. When more money chases the same amount of goods, prices rise. That's inflation. It eats away at savings, shrinks real wages, and makes ordinary people poorer, while asset owners get richer. History shows where this road can lead. In places like Venezuela, the government printed so much money to cover its debts that prices doubled every few weeks. Currencies became worthless, people lost their savings, and chaos followed. Most countries never reach that point, but even moderate inflation is enough to shake the foundations. Because the value of a dollar, a euro, or a yuan depends entirely on faith. Faith that the government will keep its word and the system will hold. Lose that faith, and money itself begins to unravel. And here's where the circle closes. The world doesn't owe its debt to some mysterious figure in the shadows. It owes it to itself, to banks, pensioners, investors, and ordinary citizens. The lenders and the borrowers are the same. That's why the global economy can keep going despite owing more than it produces. Because the money isn't meant to be repaid all at once. It's meant to keep moving forever. The system survives by expanding, by rolling over old debt into new debt. It's like a bicycle. It only stays upright as long as it keeps moving forward. Stop pedaling, and it falls. But that dependence on perpetual motion is also what makes it so dangerous. Because someday, something will cause the wheels to slow, whether it's rising interest rates, a loss of confidence, or a global shock that freezes lending. And when that happens, the machine that seemed so unstoppable could suddenly seize. That's when people begin searching for something real again, something they can hold. That's why, whenever uncertainty rises, money begins flowing into gold. Gold doesn't promise interest. It doesn't default. It just sits there, immune to politics and printing presses. In recent years, even the biggest banks have turned bullish on it. Gold is climbing to levels unseen in history because deep down, people know what it represents. The last refuge when trust fades. So the next time someone tells you that the national debt is just a number, remember this. It's not just a number. It's the beating heart of the entire system. Every school, every highway, every company, every paycheck in the modern world is somehow connected to this endless cycle of borrowing and lending. We are all part of it. We lend through our savings, we borrow through our governments, and we depend on that motion continuing day after day. But maybe the real question isn't who the money is owed to. Maybe it's how long this fragile dance can keep going before someone misses a step. Because if the debt keeps growing faster than the wealth that supports it, eventually the balance breaks. And when it does, the world will have to rediscover what value really means, beyond promises, beyond numbers, and beyond the illusion of endless debt. Smash that subscribe and like button. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And I also want to remind you that if you want to build a YouTube channel, like the one you're watching now, and make money from it, I opened a free Telegram community with the link below. See you there or in the next video. Just a reminder, I'm not a financial advisor. This video is for educational purposes only, and any results depend on your own decisions and actions.